In an article from 2 weeks ago, there was a growing concern that terrorists were pouring in through the southern border. In fact, according to NBC News, 160 migrants whose identities match those on terror watch lists have been stopped trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border. And as the conflict in Israel escalates, with many people getting very heated over the issue, there is a growing concern that something may occur in the United States in response to this. There are videos coming out of Australia of protesters. They're chanting things that are very abhorrent. There are protesters in the United States. There's protesters in Europe. And these individuals are expressing pleasure at the murder of Israeli civilians. There are people who, after Hamas murdered civilians, went into homes, kidnapped, killed, and there are reports of suspected rapes, celebrated this. Because these far leftists in, say, New York City are saying, well, they're all evil colonizers. At the same time, we have the more principled individuals who are concerned about what's going on in Palestine, calling for a ceasefire and saying you can't blame the Palestinian people for what Hamas does. Listen, my friends, it's called war. This is the reality. We don't like it when civilians die. Fine. When Hamas comes in and explicitly targets civilians, that's evil. When Israel targets civilian structures, it is not the same thing, but it is still bad that civilians die. And this is a large component of the conflict. I do not like that residential areas are carpet bombed and civilians die, but Israel's reacting to an attack from Hamas. The left argues that, yes, but Palestine is an open air prison and these people don't have access to resources. And now Israel's cutting off food, water, etc. Yo, I can't answer the problems to all this war, but I'll just tell you plainly, I can't speak to the history of Israel. But if the argument is you're trapped in a prison, so you're trying to break out, and when you do, you go murder civilians, it doesn't fly. I'm sorry, that argument doesn't make sense. And then when you have these people target and murder civilians to then come out and say, oh, no, ceasefire. It's like you realize Israel's going to target whatever they have to stop the rocket firing into Tel Aviv. I'm sorry. You can argue for whatever side you want. It's war. Civilians die. This is why war is bad. But the big concern now is, does it come to the United States? And if it does, what form will it be? For now, I don't know. But this is why so many people are saying the Biden administration has failed on the southern border. It's funny that the Biden administration says, okay, we're going to build a wall. And then they say, oh, no, we're not going to build a wall. You've got Eric Adams in New York saying, we've got to deal with this migrant crisis. It will destroy this city. But the border should remain open. This is the concern that many on the left don't understand about what's happening on the southern border. We don't know who is coming in. We should have border security. And it's funny. I mean, hundreds of years ago, you didn't. But now we have mass population density. And we have people around the world who hate us and want to sever the ties between Israel and the United States. So I will tell you this. We will read the story. And then I want to talk to you about what's going on once again with Israel and Palestine. When you have people who despise us, they will exploit this problem. They will exploit this and create such tensions in the U.S. that many on the right are going to outright say, why are we involved with Israel in the first place? Why are we experiencing this blowback when we don't need to be? Now, Israel is a strategic ally for the United States, and that's a fact. Militarily, intelligence, weapons manufacturing, these things all occur in Israel. And Ian Crossland pointed out perhaps the reason we're so interested in maintaining defending Israel is that it provides a sort of eastern protection of the Suez Canal. Egypt works with us. We got our issues. Israel works with us. And thus, the Suez is plainly under Western control. It's a very powerful canal. When that boat got stuck in the Suez, it disrupted trade to an extreme degree. And you know what? The West controls it. But now we face blowback. Very briefly, I'll show you this story, and then we'll talk about where Biden currently is at. The number of people on terror watch lists stopped at U.S. border has risen, and this is just from about a month ago. I said a couple weeks, but it's just shy of a month, 3 weeks. They say this year, U.S. border agents have encountered a growing number of individuals on the FBI's terrorist watch list trying to enter the country via the southern border, according to Homeland Threat Assessment released Thursday by the Department of Homeland Security. As of July, 160 migrants whose identities matched those in the terrorist screening dataset have been apprehended by Customs and Border Protection trying to cross the U.S.-Mexico border in 2023, compared to 100 in 2022. The number of all people, including U.S. citizens in the terror watch list, who had been stopped at the southern border as of July of this year was 216. Wow. 216 people so far. The year ain't even over. In fact, that was only in July. About halfway through the year, there were 216 compared to 165 for the entire year of 2022. The number is more than doubling. The number of border crosses on the watch list was higher in 2019 at 280. So, okay, it went down a little bit. Now it's coming back up. A DHS official told reporters that the increase from fiscal 2022 to 23 is consistent with overall increase in migrants crossing at the border. The question people are asking, and that we've heard quite a bit, will there be terror attacks and disruptions within the United States in support of Palestine, Hamas, etc.? Yes. Here's what I can't stand. What I can't stand in all of this are the leftists saying, you cannot blame the Palestinian people for what Hamas is doing. Hamas certainly blames the Israeli civilians for what the Israeli government is doing. And that is not a justification of any civilian being harmed. It is to point out these people are hypocrites and they are liars. In the same breath, they scream in the streets of New York City that it was illegal colonizers who were attacked. Some lady dancing at a dance party, that's who was killed. And many others. They didn't have weapons. They're just dancing. But you know what? To the left, they're all evil colonizers and oppressors. So when they're killed, these people celebrate it. When rockets are fired at Tel Aviv, they celebrate it and they clap and cheer in New York City. And then when you say Israel is going to target the buildings by which the rockets are being fired, they say, you're attacking civilians. That's what I see. I see these tweets. Sorry. Look, man, I'm not here to take a side in a conflict. I'm here to point out you target and murder civilians and fire rockets at civilians. Israel is going to target where those rockets come from and where the leaders are. And there will be collateral damage in war. And that's why war is bad, always. And that's why I am almost entirely opposed to foreign intervention. It's why I'm almost entirely opposed to our involvement in these military affairs, because war is bad, war is hell. And the best thing I can say is we don't participate. But you know what the reality is in the United States is that, oh boy, we overwhelmingly do. Now we have this from NBC News. Biden faces competing pressures in responding to the attacks in Israel. The left wing of the Democratic Party has become increasingly critical of Israel, and it hinted at a willingness to remain so even after the attacks. I can't speak to the history of Israel and Palestine. Sorry, can't do it. I'm 37. It's been around a lot longer than me. But the people that come out and make the argument that because a war happened in 1948, they're justified in murdering civilians. Sure, Hitler would like to have a word with you. World War I happens. Germany loses a lot of its land. Hitler then decides, and this is only 10, 15 years on, 20 or so years on, that because of that, he's justified in declaring war on these other countries to get that land back. And then you get World War II. Bad things happen. Look, I don't have all the answers, my friends. I can just tell you, like, killing civilians because a war happened 75 years ago. I have this video that I want to show you as I talk about war. Let me see if I can find it. I got a lot of stuff pulled up. Actually, you know what? Let's just do this. Let's give you some of the quick news first, and then we're probably going to go long talking about more philosophy and stuff. American Airlines pilot union calls for flights to Israel to be stopped. It is not prudent or appropriate to knowingly put our flight crews and passengers in harm's way by maintaining flights into a war zone. Yeah, you can't land in Tel Aviv if they're firing rockets at Tel Aviv. I don't know what else to tell you. They're right. They're right. This will disrupt a trade. And now we're seeing efforts to normalize relations in the region destabilizing. It's unfortunate. Cernovich says, special operations purge over the vaccine. Strategic oil supply drained. Artillery shell shortage. White men who make up combat arms declared enemy of the regime. Vet bros LMA laughing at the idea of being called back. World War III not looking good. Who is going to fight it and with what? It'll be conscription. We'll see. Or we just get decimated. Posobiec tweets, White House staffer. Biden keeps bringing up Ukraine during briefings on Israel. He's getting the two wars mixed up. Austin barely showing up to them anymore. Blinken making more decisions than anyone. Where is Joe Biden? I want to pull up this video that Al Jazeera Plus posted on October 9th In the midst of this conflict and war, just the other day, this is what Al Jazeera Plus had to say, and we'll break this down.
When is a border not a border? When it's a fence that Israel built to create the world's biggest open-air prison. Since March 30, 2018, thousands of Palestinian refugees trapped inside Gaza have taken part in the March of Return, demanding the right to return to their homes in what is now Israel. Israel built a 25-mile fence and has shot people protesting near it, saying it's defending its border. But this fence isn't a border. You know how we know that? Because Israel said so back in the 1990s. When Israel and the Palestinian Authority signed the Oslo agreements, this is how they talked about the fence. The security fence erected by Israel around the Gaza Strip and the line demarcated by the fence shall be authoritative only for the purpose of the agreement. That acknowledges that the line followed by the fence is not a border.
Doesn't really. I really don't understand their semantic argument on this one. They're saying the security fence around Gaza and the line demarcated by the fence shall be authoritative only for the purpose of this agreement. Okay, so they have agreement that there is a line demarcating this fence. What's their point? Well, let's play the video.
By the fence is not a border. Israel wants to portray Gaza as a separate country full of people who want to invade Israel. In fact, international law says Gaza is still under Israeli occupation.
The idea that there is actual Palestinian sovereignty in the Gaza Strip or even the West Bank is false. Israel continues to control all aspects of life in the Gaza Strip, and as such is deemed under international law to still be the occupying force.
So my question is, the video says Israel wants to portray the people in Gaza as defending their country, and these people want to invade their country. Well, what do you call it when a bunch of people paraglide in and start murdering civilians? The discussion we had last night is, once again, I'm not a fan of anything that's going on in the conflict, and people have called it an open air prison, and there are a lot of questions about that. Life is not easy in Gaza. But when people storm out and start murdering civilians, I kind of wonder, right? Imagine what it would have been like if Hamas soldiers, troops, and terrorists, whatever you want to call them, broke the fence down, bulldozed it, paraglided in, went to the civilians and said, please evacuate, rounded up the civilians, got them into their vehicles and sent them on their way, and then secured the areas they deemed to be their ancestral homeland. We'd be having a very different conversation. We would. Instead, they started murdering civilians and burning down houses and just said that these are evil colonizers. So you kind of lose your arguments about the moral high ground when your actual view is you will murder anyone who is in this territory. The argument from the pro-Israel side is these leftists in New York and in Gaza are chanting from the river to the sea, which basically means the entirety of Israel will be, they want to wipe it out. They want to complete control over it, no compromise, period. When they kill civilians in the process, I don't believe there is a peaceful solution when one side says they will just murder all of you, no matter who you are, even if you're a tourist. It is rumored that Americans are under the hostages as well. Let me play more.
In 2010, the UN called Gaza a large open-air prison, and it's not hard to see why. There are only 5 crossing points on the Israeli fence, and 3 of those have been closed for years. Of the 2 that remain, only 1 of those is for people.
So hold on a minute. Where's Rafah, the Egyptian crossing? They don't. This is interesting. Al Jazeera Plus doesn't even mention the Egyptian crossing, the Rafah border. Weird.
Of the 2 that remain, only 1 of those is for people. In September 2018, Israel allowed less than 6,000 people to exit through the Erez crossing. Israel even limits what goes into Gaza through the fence. Sage, cardamom, ginger, dried fruit, and potato chips have all been on the prohibited list.
It controls things that demonstrate the degree to which it occupies the territory, including the population registry. So if someone is born in the Gaza Strip and they are not registered within the Israeli authorities, they do not exist. They are unable to travel outside of the Gaza Strip.
More than 2/3 of people living in Gaza are registered refugees whose families were forced out of their homes by Zionist militias in 1948 in what became Israel.
Is a war 75 years ago justification for the murder of civilians who were born 50 years after this? Again, if they had broken down the fences, or let's say they tore the fences down and then advanced, I don't know, 300 yards, and then said, we are reclaiming this territory in the name of the people who were oppressed by the Zionists who came to Israel, et cetera, et cetera. Evacuated civilians, protected them, apologized and said, listen, this is war. Get out of here. Very different question. The interesting thing about this video, they put it out during the conflict and they don't point out Egypt has a border with Gaza. And Egypt certainly could allow these people they could allow supplies that they don't.
Israel's Jewish majority was cemented by expelling 4 out of every 5 Palestinians who had lived there. So this fence stands between Palestinians and their former homes, from which they were evicted and to which they've been forbidden from returning. It confines them to a strip of land in which they've been imprisoned as refugees for generations. To the Palestinians of Gaza taking part in the March of Return, they're not breaching another country's borders. They're simply attempting to go home.
And in the process, massacring civilians. That's it. Now, you can, look, there's a lot of videos. There's a video where there are men carrying out bodies that are covered. Maybe it's fake. Maybe it's propaganda. I got no problem saying that. There are photos of people. It's like, this person died doing this thing. And I'm like, maybe not. I don't believe it. But there are some videos that are Occam's razor, probably true, probably real. Internet sleuths have figured out who some of these people are. I don't think that when protesters in New York City celebrate the killing of evil colonizers, civilians, and celebrate the bombing of Tel Aviv, civilians, I kind of believe the videos are real and that Hamas absolutely intends to murder civilians. You see what this is? Look, I don't like any of the conflict. I'm not a historical scholar or expert, but I can tell you outright, they're just simply trying to return to their homes. That's a lie. They want to kill evil colonizers. That's what they claim to be doing. Egypt has a border crossing. They don't mention that either. The far left lies. It's what they do. I do not think Israel is innocent. I think war always has its wrongdoings and collateral damage. It's hard to realize. But what's the argument right now? People come on and they say Israel is bombing civilians, and it's like, bro, are they really doing that or are you lying? Okay, this is the problem. They put out a video and they say they're simply trying to go home. Bro, they massacred civilians. We watched it happen. And then they say the same people, Israel's targeting civilians. Are they? Or are they targeting military leaders and terrorists who have killed civilians and are trying to take out weapons depots? I don't trust the lies. I don't. I do not believe that Vladimir Putin is a comic book villain who wants to just take over Ukraine and then march on Poland. That makes no sense. Give me a strategic reason why the leader of a nation would make a move. Okay, here's one. They have a naval base in Crimea. They need access to the Black Sea. There's other means of access too. They have a military base in Tartus. They want access, and that's the Mediterranean. I believe Mediterranean. They want access to the Black Sea. They want to be able to trade. So why do they invade and then take the Donbass and move on down to the land to take this territory? It's a land bridge, is how it's been described, to make sure that they have land access to Crimea. The argument that they would then try to advance on Poland makes no sense, especially when people say that Vladimir Putin's forces are being decimated and pushed back, repelled. So they can't take Poland? Okay, comic book villainy makes no sense. There are narratives and ideologies at play here which spell things out. Why does Israel bomb a school? We know that Hamas uses these schools, the Al-Qassam brigades, to fire rockets into Israel. Israel says, warning to civilians in the areas, evacuate. This is being used as a weapons base, and we're taking it out. It is comic book villainy to say that Israel is just blowing up civilians for no reason. Why does Hamas target civilians? Again, I'm not even going to play the comic book villainy route. To Hamas and to many of these people in Palestine, even the civilians, in fact, the civilians especially, they're all in Israel forced to join the IDF, and each and every one of them is an occupying force. The people who are celebrating and dancing are exacerbating the problem and are occupying their land. They view them as evil. So I don't play these stupid games. But we'll pull up some tweets. We have Ben Shapiro and Andrew Tate in an argument. Andrew Tate made this video that I want you to hear because Andrew Tate is correct. I'll play it for you now.
The only people who advocate violence are people who are not particularly familiar with violence. Professional fighters try very hard not to get in street fights. We know how ugly true violence is. There's a lot of people who are like, yeah, war, yeah, violence. If it came to your doorstep, you would be begging for peace. We may want war when it's somewhere else. We may want war for theaters and theatrics and ideologies and think war is funny to look at on Twitter. But when it comes to you, you would run like as fast as you could and beg for peace.
I will say Andrew Tate is correct, but he's somewhat wrong. And the reason I say he's wrong only is because they wouldn't just beg. They'd be crying. They would have snot pouring from their nose all over their mouths with tears. Grown men screaming and begging, crying and praying for it to stop. Because people don't understand. And I think when you look at all the news around people supporting the conflict and the war, these ideologues in New York clapping and cheering these far leftists. Here's the funny thing. If one of these far leftists in support of Palestine was in Israel, protesting Israel, and they went down to this music festival and were actually saying things like, this is wrong and Israel should not do what they're doing in Gaza, Hamas would have beaten them to death and dragged their corpses through the street. Why? Because they're Americans. Doesn't matter what you support. The issue is that in war, no enemy combatant is going to stop and ask the individual at this rave or whatever, the colonizers, whatever they want to call them. They're not going to stop and ask, do you support Palestine or Israel? They're going to say, we are here and we're taking this land and you're all evil. That's the reality of war. If war really came to everyone's doorstep, people really don't get it. There are a lot of people who think they're badass and they're like, I could survive and I could do it. And it's funny when even I say things like I wouldn't be able I specifically left conflict zones because conflict got too hot. They're like, Tim thinks he's so tough and he could survive. I'm saying quite the opposite. When I was covering these conflicts, I was in Turkey during the Gezi Park unrest. Not that big a deal on the grand scale of things. A lot of tear gas. And I never feared for my life because people were not being murdered, but people were Molotoving. There was fighting. Good Kurds fighting with, I think it was it Kurds fighting with the Turkish police? It's been 10 years, man. And when I went to Egypt, I left when it escalated to more civil conflict, civil war. It was civil unrest and revolution, the second one. But when they brought in the APCs, I said, guys, that's about it for me. In Ukraine, I left before they started unloading live rounds and shooting people when they were ousting Yanukovych. You know, my capabilities are civil unrest. You know, that's it. And when it got to the point of civil war, conflict, or hot war, I'm like, guys, this is beyond my capabilities. I have minimal first aid training. I have first aid training, hostile environment training, better than the average person. But you know what you need? You need former military. So a lot of news organizations hire former military with security expertise and a decade plus in the field who know how to handle war to provide the information and the context on the ground. That's where I say, I'm out. I couldn't do it. I'm just some dude who can handle some riots. That's it. If war really broke out, man, I'd probably do better than most only because I'm listening to the news. But, the average person, their capabilities. Tristan Tate tweeted, people on Twitter who I notice aren't in the Middle East are trying to drag every follower into an absolute position. He says, reminder, you can sympathize totally with the Palestinian cause and also condemn the actions of individual soldiers aligned with Hamas. Sympathize totally with Israeli standpoint and condemn the carpet bombing of neighborhoods containing women and children. Stop trying to force everybody into absolute alignment with everything done by one particular side. People who say there are gray areas aren't wrong. I pray for peace. I agree with the overall message, but I still have to push back to a certain degree. When he says that you can sympathize, he's right. But let me just point out, the people claiming that Palestinian civilians are not Hamas, yet the people in support of Hamas view this as their resistance fighters. They do. I don't want civilians being harmed or killed, and many of them are not fighting. But this is war. That's it. There is no answer. There is no simple solution. Collateral damage happens in war. If Hamas wages war and uses civilian locations, civilians will die. Sympathize with Israel for sure. It's war. People want to tell you who's right, who's wrong, and they get so insane about it. Try having a rational conversation with someone. You can't. It's crazy. We've had guests on Timcast IRL. Their blood boils. They start screaming, Israel has done this, Israel. And I'm like, calm down, dude. It's war. acting like Palestine is not causing problems or killing civilians. Bro, it's all bad. But the logic here is like they go back to 1948. Israel did this. Sure, they did. What do I do now? I'm alive now. How do we stop the fighting? The answer is not allowing Hamas to go and kill civilians. Maybe this could be the end of Gaza. I don't know. Maybe. Mario Naufel says, Justin, the U.S. Special Reporter for Human Rights in Palestine, we are horrified by what is happening and we call for a truce. And Ben Shapiro says they can F right off. Why? Well, Ben Shapiro is looking at it this way. Hamas killed a bunch of civilians. They fired 5,000 rockets from civilian locations, from hospitals and schools into Israel, targeting civilians, and celebrated it. Israel responds by blowing these targets up. There's collateral damage and it affects civilians. So he says, F right off. We're going to take out Hamas. Andrew Tate says, Mr. Tough Guy, let me assure you, as someone who has done his own fighting, as opposed to excitedly encouraging others to do it for him, while sitting at a home in a comfy chair, peace is always worth a conversation. And I agree with Andrew Tate. Ben Shapiro says, he said, Ben Shapiro then said, criticized Andrew Tate for pimping out women, saying that people who are raping and rape women and kidnap children must be eradicated. This is the issue. Ben Shapiro is calling for the people who rape women and kidnap children to be eradicated. But the point being made by Andrew Tate is that there are civilians caught in the crossfire. There's no answer, man. I'm not going to get in the middle of this. I don't know what to tell you. I have no idea. I agree with Ben Shapiro. The raping and murdering of kidnapping of children, the killing of civilians, these people must be stopped. And then the argument is, yes, but civilians are being killed in the crossfire. And it is better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent person suffer. It's war, baby. War knows no morals, only victory. You can talk about what we should do or shouldn't do, but in the end, those who are willing to look, if Hamas massacred every civilian in Israel and they won the war, that'd be it. They'd set the narrative. They'd control the tone. Israel is the victor here. Israel is stronger and has gained more ground. So these people say they're evil. They're the villains. If it was the other way around and Israel and the Jews were confined to the Gaza Strip, the narratives would be inverted. But here we are. It is only because Israel can defend itself. If the Iron Dome did not exist, the narrative would be very different. Bombings of civilian targets, people dead. But Israel has the means to defend itself, and it will, and there will be collateral damage because it's war. And then everyone wants to assert who's right or who's wrong. If Hamas wasn't blowing up civilians and targeting civilians, Israel would not be blowing up buildings in Gaza. And then they argue if Israel wasn't occupying this territory and locking, Palestinians in an open air prison, then there wouldn't be bombings on civilian targets. Like, bro, I'm sorry, there's no justification for bombing civilians. And then they say, what would you have the Palestinians do? Just do nothing and just remain locked up in their open air prison and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, bro, like I said, if they broke the barricades down and that's all they did and said, we will not be in an open air prison, we demand access to resources and goods, then it'd be a different story. That's not what they did. They broke the barricades down, paraglided in, and murdered civilians. And this is where we are. There's no easy answer. Sorry. Tristan Tate responded saying, I'm sure only men who fight for Hamas die in these airstrikes you're praising. The footage from the ground says otherwise. Either you've changed your tune 22 hours later. Okay, look. What should Israel do? Should Israel say, let them keep firing rockets at us? That wouldn't make sense, would it? But you see, people are ideologically bent. They say Israel's an occupying force and they're evil, therefore the bombing of civilians is justified. Or they say, well, Hamas is doing it and it's not the Palestinian civilians. Why are the civilians getting hit? I'm sorry, dude. Welcome to war. This is why I think war is bad. But that's it. This is the nature of reality. You watch that. There's that video I brought up where hyenas are eating a gazelle alive. And we say like, oh, that poor animal. Well, the hyena's got to eat, right? Should the hyena starve to death and cease to exist? Dude, I don't know what to tell you, man. Israel, the stronger force here with international support, is not going to let their civilians be bombed. They're going to target the locations used by Hamas. Hamas uses human shields. Hamas targets civilians as well. That's it. Welcome to war, baby. Everyone's going to blame someone else, but it doesn't matter. History is written by the victor and war is hell. I can only say this. It may come to the U.S. doorstep. And you will cry and you will pray and you will beg that it didn't. There's a lot of people who talk about national divorce. There's no such thing. This is national divorce. This is two groups of people opposed to each other. Let's say the United States fell into a national divorce. One state is going to be like, we need access to water. They're not going to let you just take it from them. They want to survive. There will be war and conflict. People will say, you know, my family owned that land in Colorado and now they were forced into Oklahoma, but that land belongs to me, but they don't recognize it anymore. The far left will take a Chaz chop, right? You're going to end up with a Seattle situation where far leftists come in and they take over several blocks. And then they say, this is now property of the occupied territory or whatever. This or the what do they call? They called it the occupied protest or whatever. Far leftists will seize buildings. Someone will then say, my family built that. My great-grandfather built that building and they took it from me and I have a right to it. And then they're going to go in and kill the people running the store there. The people running the store there are going to be oblivious to what's going on because they're just civilians who are given a building by the people who seized it 10 years ago. And they're going to say, these people came in and killed civilians. And the people are going to be like, they had stolen my building from my family. You see where this goes? Everybody is right. Everybody is wrong. It doesn't matter. It comes down to brutal, bloody force that we all hate. There's no easy answers, my friends. Should the people of Palestine just let Israel stay on this territory? Don't know what to tell you. Should the U.S. be involved? Yeah, no, definitely not. But we are, and we have been for basically ever. So this just won't stop. It won't stop until one side is gone. That's war. And there's, you know, the people who are like, Israel should respect this and do this. Israel ceasefire. Okay. Israel does ceasefire. What happens next? More bombings, more civilians killed. I'm not telling you what you should do. I'm just saying that will happen. It's a question I asked in response to this article. Haaretz writes, opinion, Israel can't imprison 2 million Gazans without paying a cruel price. They wrote this yesterday. Okay. Honest question. You tear down the fencing around the Gaza Strip and say free movement for all. What happens? Everyone's going to laugh. So obviously, they're going to go and start massacring people. Okay, so what do? They can't imprison people without paying a price? Yeah, I'm pretty sure if they take those barricades down, they'll just go and start murdering a bunch of civilians like they already did. So what do? I don't have the answers for you, my friends. I don't. All I can really say is we should secure our borders and make sure this conflict doesn't come to our streets. Although I think it's fair to say the U.S. is already involved. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.